Hutchence and Helena Christensen are leaving a nightclub, laughing, holding hands, living the kind of life that looks perfect from the outside. He's the front man of one of the biggest rock bands in the world. She's one of the most sought-after supermodels on the planet. They're young, they're beautiful, they're in love, and in about 60 seconds, everything is going to change. A random act of violence on a Copenhagen sidewalk is about to alter the course of Michael Hutchence's life in ways that nobody, not even Helena standing right next to him, will fully understand for years. This is the story of the night that changed Michael forever. The night that his friends say he was never the same after. The night that a taxi driver's fists did damage that would echo through the next 5 years of Michael's life, all the way to that hotel room in 1997. Let me take you back to where Michael and Helena were before that night, because understanding what he was like before makes the after so much more devastating. Michael met Helena Christensen in 1991. She was 22, he was 31. She just won a modeling competition and was starting to break into the international fashion world. He was riding high on the success of the Kick album, which had made INXS into genuine global superstars. They met at a party, and according to people who were there, the connection was instant. Not just physical attraction, though there was obviously plenty of that, but something deeper. Michael was drawn to her intelligence, her creativity, her artistic sensibility. Helena was drawn to his charisma, his passion for life, his genuine kindness underneath all that rock star swagger. Their relationship became this beautiful thing that played out across magazine covers and music videos. Helena appeared in INXS's video for Taste It in 1992, and if you watch it, you can see the real chemistry between them. This wasn't acting, this was two people genuinely in love, and the camera captured it. They traveled the world together. She'd join him on tour when her modeling schedule allowed. He'd fly to Paris or Milan or New York to be with her during Fashion Week. From the outside, they were living a fairy tale. Young, gorgeous, successful, madly in love. But here's what people didn't see. Michael was sensitive, deeply, profoundly sensitive. The kind of person who felt everything more intensely than the average person. His friends and bandmates had always known this about him. He could be the life of the party, the guy who lit up every room he walked into, but he could also retreat into these dark places emotionally. The highs were higher for Michael, but the lows were lower too. Helena saw that side of him. In interviews she's given over the years, she's talked about how Michael had this incredible capacity for joy, but also this vulnerability that made him almost fragile at times. She said he was one of the most genuinely kind people she'd ever known. He'd give you the shirt off his back. He'd spend hours talking to a stranger who needed someone to listen. He cared about people in a way that was becoming increasingly rare in the celebrity world they inhabited. And she loved that about him. But she also worried about him. The music industry was brutal. The pressure to maintain success, to keep producing hits, to be on all the time for fans and media, it was grinding him down. By 1992, INXS had been at the top for several years. That kind of sustained fame takes a toll. So now we're in August of 1992. Michael and Helena are in Copenhagen. INXS isn't on tour at the moment, so they're taking some time together, just being a couple, enjoying the summer in Europe. Copenhagen in August is beautiful. Long days, warm nights, that Scandinavian summer magic where the sun barely sets. They'd spent the evening at a nightclub, dancing, drinking, having fun. Just a normal night out for a rock star and a supermodel trying to have something resembling a normal relationship. They left the club around 2 in the morning. The streets were relatively quiet at that hour, just a few people here and there, some taxis cruising for fares.
Here's where the accounts get specific, and this is important because Helena has talked about this publicly multiple times, so we know the details. They were walking down the street, probably heading back to their hotel, when they encountered a taxi. There are slightly different versions of exactly how the confrontation started. Some reports say the taxi nearly hit them, others say there was some kind of verbal exchange. But the bottom line is this: something happened that made Michael protective of Helena. Maybe the driver said something inappropriate to her. Maybe the driving was aggressive and scared her. Whatever it was, Michael stepped in. Because that's who Michael was. He saw himself as Helena's protector. And this taxi driver, for reasons we'll probably never fully understand, took offense. What happened next was brutal and random and changed everything. The taxi driver got out of his car and attacked Michael. We're talking about a physical assault, punches to the head. Michael went down. He hit the pavement hard. Helena was screaming, trying to intervene, trying to get help. Other people on the street eventually broke it up. The taxi driver got back in his car and drove away. Michael was left on the ground, bleeding, dazed, not entirely sure what had just happened. Helena got him back to their hotel. He didn't want to go to the hospital that night. This is crucial. He didn't seek immediate medical attention, and that decision, that very understandable decision to just go back to the hotel and ice his injuries and try to sleep it off, that decision had consequences that nobody could have predicted. The next morning, Michael woke up, and something was wrong. He couldn't smell. He couldn't taste. His head was pounding. He felt disoriented, confused, not quite himself. Helena insisted they go to a hospital. They went to a Copenhagen hospital, and the doctors examined him. They confirmed he'd suffered head trauma. They told him the loss of smell and taste was likely due to damage to the olfactory nerves, which can happen when the brain gets knocked around inside the skull. They said it might be temporary, it might come back, but they also said it might not, and they sent him home with painkillers and instructions to rest. What they didn't fully communicate, or what Michael didn't fully understand, was the potential for long-term effects beyond the loss of smell and taste. Traumatic brain injury is complicated. This is something we understand much better now in 2025 than we did in 1992. Back then, the attitude was often, if you're conscious and you can walk and talk, you're probably fine. Concussion protocols weren't what they are now. The understanding of how damage to the brain can affect personality, mood regulation, impulse control, depression risk, all of that was still emerging science. So Michael was told he'd lost his sense of smell and taste, which was devastating enough for someone who loved food and wine and the sensory pleasures of life. But nobody sat him down and said, hey, you might also experience depression you've never felt before. You might have mood swings. You might find yourself unable to regulate emotions the way you used to. Your personality might actually change. And that's exactly what started to happen. Helena noticed it first. She was with him every day, so she saw the subtle shifts that other people might have missed. Michael became more withdrawn. He had always had moody periods, but this was different. This was darker, more persistent. He'd have these moments of intense sadness that seemed to come out of nowhere. He'd get angry more easily, frustrated by small things that wouldn't have bothered him before. His patience was shorter. His joy, when it came, felt more manic, less sustainable. Helena later said in interviews that it was like watching someone slowly become a different person. Not completely different, but shifted. The Michael she'd fallen in love with was still there, but there was this new layer of darkness over everything. The loss of smell and taste haunted him. Think about what that means for someone like Michael. He couldn't taste wine anymore. He couldn't enjoy a great meal. Those simple pleasures that most of us take for granted, they were gone. And every time he sat down to eat, every time someone offered him a glass of wine, he was reminded of what had been taken from him on that Copenhagen street. It became this constant, daily reminder of the assault. Some people close to Michael said he became almost obsessed with it. He'd tried different foods, hoping maybe today would be the day his taste came back. It never did. The olfactory damage was permanent. But the psychological damage was even worse, even if it was less obvious. Michael started self-medicating. He'd always enjoyed a drink, always been known to party, but his substance use increased after Copenhagen. And this is where it gets tricky to talk about because we have to be careful not to oversimplify. Michael Hutchenson wasn't just a victim of a brain injury who descended into addiction. He was a complex human being dealing with multiple pressures. The brain injury was one factor, the pressure of fame was another, relationship issues were another, the normal human struggle with meaning and purpose, that was in there too. But the people who knew him best, including Helena, have said that Copenhagen was a turning point. That's when things started to unravel in a way they hadn't before.
Helena and Michael's relationship continued for a few more years after Copenhagen. They stayed together until 1995, but she's been honest in interviews that those years were increasingly difficult. Michael's mood swings became harder to navigate. His darkness became deeper. She loved him desperately and tried to help him, but there's only so much one person can do when someone is dealing with undiagnosed, untreated brain injury and all the psychological fallout that comes with it. When they finally broke up in 1995, she later said it was one of the hardest decisions she'd ever made. She still loved him, but the relationship had become unsustainable. The person she'd fallen in love with in 1991 was slipping further and further away. Here's what we know now about traumatic brain injury that we didn't know as well in 1992. Damage to the frontal lobe, which is common in the kind of assault Michael experienced, can affect executive function, impulse control, and emotional regulation. It can literally change someone's personality. It can make someone more prone to depression and anxiety. It can impair judgment. And because the damage is invisible, because there's no cast or scar that people can see, the person suffering from it often doesn't get the support or understanding they need. People just think they've changed, gotten difficult, become moody or unreliable. They don't understand there's actual neurological damage causing these changes. Michael's bandmates in INXS noticed the change too. Andrew Farriss has talked about this in interviews. He said that after 1992, Michael was different, more unpredictable, harder to work with sometimes, more prone to missing rehearsals or showing up late, more conflict within the band about creative direction. Now, some of that might have happened anyway. Bands that have been together for years often go through rough patches, but the timing is significant. The deterioration in INXS's internal dynamics accelerated after Copenhagen. The albums they made in the mid-90s didn't capture the magic of Kick or even the earlier albums. Something was off. And while there were multiple factors contributing to that, Michael's changed mental state was definitely one of them. The really tragic thing is that Michael himself knew something was wrong. Friends who talked to him in the mid-90s said he was aware that he wasn't the person he used to be. He'd reference the Copenhagen assault. He'd talk about how he couldn't smell or taste anymore. But I don't think he fully understood the connection between the head trauma and the psychological changes he was experiencing. He thought he was just depressed. He thought he was just struggling with fame. He didn't realize that his brain had been physically damaged in a way that made all of those struggles harder to cope with. If he'd had access to the kind of neurological and psychological care we have available now, if someone had done proper brain scans and neuropsychological testing and put together a comprehensive treatment plan, maybe things would have been different. But that didn't happen. Helena has lived with the weight of that night for decades now. In interviews, you can hear the emotion in her voice when she talks about it. She was there. She witnessed the assault. She saw Michael go down. She heard his head hit the pavement. And then she watched over the next 5 years as the man she loved slowly unraveled. She said she feels like that taxi driver didn't just hurt Michael that night. He started a chain of events that eventually led to Michael's death. That's a heavy thing to carry. And while we can't draw a straight line from the Copenhagen assault to the Ritz-Carlton hotel room in Sydney in November 1997, we also can't pretend they're unrelated events. The medical community has studied cases like Michael's. There's research showing that people who suffer traumatic brain injuries, even ones that seem relatively minor at the time, are at significantly higher risk for depression, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation in the years following the injury. The brain is incredibly complex, and when it gets damaged, the effects can ripple out in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Michael's loss of smell and taste was the visible consequence of the Copenhagen assault, but the invisible consequences, the changes to his mood, his personality, his ability to cope with stress and regulate his emotions, those were probably even more significant in terms of the trajectory of his final years. By 1997, Michael was in a very dark place. His relationship with Paula Yates was tumultuous. He was caught up in a custody battle over her daughter. INXS was planning a 20th anniversary tour, but there was tension within the band. He was drinking heavily. He was using other substances. He was isolated from many of his old friends. And underlying all of it was the brain damage from 5 years earlier, making everything harder, making his depression deeper, making his impulse control worse. When you understand the Copenhagen context, the events of November 22nd in Sydney become less mysterious. It's not that the brain injury caused what happened that day, but it was a factor. It was part of the complicated web of circumstances that led to that hotel room.
If Michael Hutchence could speak to us now, I think he'd want people to understand that what happened in Copenhagen mattered. It wasn't just a random assault that he shook off. It fundamentally altered his brain chemistry and his psychological state in ways that made everything harder from that point forward. He'd want people to take head injuries seriously. He'd want people to seek proper medical care. He'd want people to understand that invisible injuries can be just as devastating as visible ones. And maybe, just maybe, he'd want people to know that even rock stars, even people who seem to have it all, can be vulnerable to random violence and its long-term consequences. Helena Christensen witnessed the beginning of Michael Hutchence's end, and she's carried that knowledge for decades. That's a heavy burden, but she's borne it with grace and dignity, and by being willing to talk about what happened, by being honest about the changes she saw in Michael after Copenhagen, she's helped us understand his story more fully. She's helped us see beyond the headlines and the tabloid speculation to the real human tragedy of a kind, talented man whose brain was damaged by a moment of random violence and who never fully recovered from it.